Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. It's broadcast 1020. It is day 171 since Hamas's attack on Israel. And of course, our heart is still where it's been, which is broken and attuned and strengthening. I hope that you had a Purim that gave you a little bit of joy. Everybody needs some. And the kind of language in the story of Purim will last with me, and I'm sure with you, for a long time. I find myself reflecting on one very small section of the 8th chapter of the scroll of Esther, Megillat Esther. You know, the big victory. And it's not the content we're going to be learning about today, but just to reflect for a moment after Purim. The big victory of Purim is actually that the king wasn't able to rescind the decree that Haman had gotten him to pass, which allowed for the assault on Jews, the institutionalization of anti-Semitism throughout the Persian Empire. But actually, the great victory was that a new law was passed which allowed, this is chapter 8, verse 11, if you'd like to look it up, which allowed the Jews to fight for their lives. So powerful, so interesting to think about. The great victory was not the erasure of anti-Semitism, but actually the right of Jews to defend themselves. And it seems very much in sync with where our hearts are right now, for us to remember what it is to be fighting for our lives. In language, in legislation, in military, in culture, in all of these ways, we are in a fight for our lives. And yes, there are reasons to feel strong and safe in the world. I don't know how widely I would suggest that that's the reality for Jews right now, but it is still true that I was able to speak with my daughter, who was on the beach in Tel Aviv with thousands of people celebrating Purim, dancing and reading Megillah, where there were survivors of the Nova Festival there dancing. We are dancing again. And I bless us not to miss the power of our resilience, the power of our presence, and the enduring spirit of the Jewish people. And so we have, in so many ways, begun the founding of our people and our homeland again. But we do so from a position that our ancestors could never have imagined. So let me reflect on this week's Parsha, holding on to the important lessons of Purim. As jarring as the commandment and tradition to feel joyous was, it was a gift. And so, let's look at this Parsha. Parsha TZAV, the second Torah portion in the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, gives us the beginnings, again, of the systems of sacrifice. And for some of us, we look at this system as not just outdated, but very complicated, hard to penetrate. I recently was reviewing some teaching by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, who looked at the way civilizations, ancient civilizations, rose and fell. And he pointed to the way that the Mayans in particular, that had a civilization very developed for 35 centuries, they eventually resorted to sacrifice, human sacrifice, as a way of trying to avoid their big problems. They decided to go into magical thinking, to allow some fundamentalist notion of religious truth to dictate their big decisions, and they stopped facing the big ones because the big ones became too complicated. And Rabbi Sachs points out, and it's true historically, that here we are, Jews, centuries, millennia after our ancestors, and we moved in the opposite direction. We moved from a place of sacrifices, described in this week's Torah portion, in TZAV, different kinds of ways of connecting with the divine. But in the year 70 CE, when we lost the Second Temple, we had a major shift in the way that we organized ourselves and faced our big problems. Through the ingenuity of the early rabbis, most notably Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, we began to have conversations even in our grief about what to do once sacrifices were unable to be offered. We couldn't do it anymore. And so we began to find replacements for it. Some believed that by discussing the sacrifices, we achieved the same level of connection with God as offering the sacrifices. Some came to believe that prayer replaced sacrifice, learning replace sacrifice. But what's clear in the modern Jewish people is that there are those who put their lives on the line, and by which I mean the Israel Defense Forces, chayalim and chayalot, women and men who fight for our people. That is sacrifice, and all too often, and we are following the headlines very closely, they pay the ultimate sacrifice. What it is to be in a life of service is to truly understand what is in this week's Parsha, TZAV. I command you, when necessary, offer these sacrifices. If you're following the political debates in Israel right now, the idea that huge segments of Israel society would consider not serving our people's safety, or our people's welfare, by which I mean the Haredi community, and this is not an anti-Haredi screed, the Haredi community thinking that they should only have to sacrifice through learning and not by offering their own vulnerable selves on the line as part of our people. There are lots of ways, friends, that we as the modern Jewish people have to continue learning the lessons of this week's Torah portion of TZAV. One of them is the recognition that there are lots of ways that we offer sacrifices. We offer our means, we offer our time, we connect our hearts, we pay attention, we advocate, we defend, we sing, we scream, we pray, we learn, and yes, we fight. I'm watching our young people on campus struggle against terrible and pervasive anti-Semitism from faculty, from institutions, and from fellow students. The culture of learning itself, in the place of liberal bastions of academics, is becoming in some ways really selective about that application, the critical thinking that universities are meant to really represent and further. But in all of these situations, we are called to be present, and it's not fun. It's not the way that we would choose to spend our time. It's not what we would choose to do with our means. Why should we have to spend our time and money defending ourselves? We should be spending that time and money not just celebrating our family, but achieving justice for others in the world. It is clear that vulnerability is a Jewish reality today again. Perhaps it always has been. But the way that we offer those sacrifices has multiple purposes, as we learn in this week's Parsha. Parshat TZAV tells us that there are sometimes you offer sacrifices because it's just what you do. Those are the tmidim, everyday sacrifices. It is true there are also sacrifices for when we have done wrong. And we are not a perfect people, never will be, though we strive. It is also clear that there are times where we offer sacrifices for gratitude, thanksgiving, the Korban Todah. And no one couldn't give. There were different levels of giving. If you had a lot, you offered expensive cattle. If you had less, you offered birds. If you had less, you offered grain. And if you had less, you offered from your own heart. Here we are, friends. Here we are, yet again, in a position where we need to consider, first of all, the pain of sacrifice, but also the ancient truth that it embodies, as Rabbi Sachs explained. Not only do we learn from our ancient models what it is to live lives of service and to sacrifice when necessary, but as opposed to the other civilizations which began to sacrifice their future, their children, when the problems became too big, we recognize that part of the way that we offer our own sacrifices is by ensuring the future and not giving up on critical thinking. No problem is too big for our people. No problem. We used to offer sacrifices as part of the way to connect with God. Now, we use multiple intelligences. We do pray. We do learn. We do fight when we must. We do everything we must. And we will continue to do so. That's who we are. That's who we've been. And that's who our children will be blessed to be too. Fighters who understand what sacrifice truly means and who offers it and who offer it with creativity, with passion, with a deep sense of history and an incredible sense of covenantal obligation to the future. I bless us, friends. TZAV. This is a command to really consider what sacrifice means and to get on board with our people's destiny. If you have worried, I'm with you. If you have sat concerned about what the future looks like, I'm with you. If you have sat heartbroken, I've been there with you too. But we also should sit and stand and march and fly resolutely with confidence and with hope, because look at who we have become. We have become a people who have transformed even the ways that we connect with God for the sake of our children and the sake of the world. So let's make sure, friends, let's make sure to do this work wholeheartedly. With love in our hearts, let's face east and sing. Kol hod balevav penima, nefesh Yehudi homia, ulefatei mizrach kadima, ayin letzion Sophia. Od lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnot alpayim, liot am chovshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim, liot am chovshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim. Bring them home now. Am Yisrael Chai. See you tomorrow, friends. Take care.